Nexus Station hung in the void between three star systems like a jewel made of metal and light. And every species in the known galaxy passed through its corridors at one time or another, seeking trade and profit and sometimes just the thrill of seeing something. New Seon had dreamed of this place since childhood, when their mentor Taehyun had shown them images of the massive structures spinning slowly against the stars. And now they stood at the viewport of their small trading vessel, watching it grow larger with each passing moment. The young Valorian merchant ruffled their emerald feathers with anticipation, a gesture their species made when excitement became too much to contain. And they checked their cargo manifest for the 100th time to make sure everything was in order. "You are ready for this," Seo Yun whispered to themselves. Though their voice trembled slightly with the weight of responsibility, this was their first solo mission, and everything depended on making good trades and returning home with profit enough to prove their worth to the trading guild that had sponsored their journey. Across the stars, the docking process took longer than expected, and Seo Yun used the time to review the cultural notes Taehyun had prepared for them. Pages and pages of advice about which species to approach and which to avoid, and how to recognize a good deal from a trap. One section caught their attention more than the others. Marked with red symbols that indicated danger of the highest order, the Terrans, the document read, "Also called humans, occupy a restricted sector of most major stations including Nexus, and you would do well to stay far from their territory." Seo Yun tilted their head in the curious manner of their kind and read on with growing confusion. The notes described creatures that sounded more like monsters from old stories than real beings. Predators who had evolved on a world so hostile that survival required madness. Organisms that could repair their own damaged flesh and continue fighting long after any reasonable creature would have surrendered to death. Superstition, Seo Yun muttered, closing the document with a flick of their wing fingers. Taehyun has always been too cautious. The airlock cycled open and Seo Yun stepped onto Nexus Station for the first time, immediately overwhelmed by the noise and color and smell of 1,000 different worlds mixing together in one place. Tall Khazari traders argued prices in their clicking language while small furry nomads scurried between legs, carrying packages twice their size. And overhead, the graceful Sylphie drifted on artificial currents designed for their kind. Seo Yun moved through the crowd with growing confidence, their merchant instincts already identifying opportunities and calculating potential profits. And within an hour, they had completed their first successful trade. The feeling was incredible, better than anything they had imagined. And Seo Yun allowed themselves a moment of pride before moving on to seek the next opportunity. It was near the central marketplace that they first heard the whispers. A group of Khazari merchants huddled near a food stall, their voices low, but their clicking language carrying further than they realized. And Seonjung's translation implant picked up fragments of their conversation. "The humans brought in 3 ships this morning," one of them said, "loaded with weapons and supplies for the outer colonies. I saw one of them in the medical bay yesterday," another replied. The creature had lost a limb in some accident and was simply waiting for a new one to be attached, talking and laughing as if nothing was wrong. "They feel no pain," the first one insisted. "Everyone knows this. They are not truly alive in the way we understand life." Seo Yun wanted to interrupt and call them foolish for believing such obvious nonsense. But something in their voices made them hesitate. Something that sounded less like gossip and more like genuine fear. The young merchant moved on, but found the whispers following them everywhere they went. A Sylphie trader warned them away from the eastern corridors because humans walked there freely and no one could predict what might provoke them. A nomad porter told stories of humans who had chased enemies across entire planets, never stopping to rest, never giving up until their prey collapsed from exhaustion. An elderly Valorian merchant Someone from Seo Yun's own world grabbed their wing and pulled them close to deliver a warning. They form bonds with anything, the old one hissed. Even creatures they have just met, and once bonded they will kill and die without hesitation to protect what they consider theirs. It is not loyalty as we understand it, but something far more dangerous. Yun pulled free and smoothed their ruffled feathers with a nervous gesture. They could not quite control. These are just stories, they said firmly, meant to frighten children and new traders. The old merchant shook their head slowly and turned away without another word, leaving Seo Yun alone with their doubts. The afternoon passed in a blur of trades and negotiations, and Seo Yun tried to focus on business. But the whispers had planted seeds of uncertainty that refused to stop growing. They were crossing the main cargo plaza when it happened. A loading crane malfunctioned without warning, its magnetic clamps releasing a container that weighed more than Seo Yun's entire ship, and the massive box of metal tumbled toward a group of Valorian traders who had no time to move. Seo Yun screamed a warning that came too late. Then something impossible happened. A figure moved faster than Seo Yun's eyes could track. A tall creature with brown skin and black hair cut short against their skull, and the figure simply reached up and caught the falling container with both hands. The impact should have crushed every bone in their body, should have driven them into the floor like a stake into soft ground. But instead they simply stood there holding tons of metal above their head, while the Valorians scrambled to safety. The creature set the container down as casually as Seo Yun might set down a cup of water. And then they looked up and met Seo Yun's eyes across the plaza. There was something in that gaze that Seo Yun could not name. Something calm and confident and utterly unafraid. And then the creature simply nodded once and walked away. Without a word, Seo Yun stood frozen in place as their heart raced and their feathers refused to lie flat against their body. The whispers were not superstition. The stories were not exaggeration. The humans were real. And they were everything the galaxy had warned them about. An alarm shattered the moment, cutting through the noise of the marketplace with a sound that made every species present freeze in sudden terror. Attention all residents and visitors. A voice announced over every speaker in the station. Keth raiders have been detected approaching Nexus Station in overwhelming numbers. All civilians must proceed to designated shelter areas immediately. This is not a drill. Panic erupted around. Yuna's merchants abandoned their stalls, and traders dropped their goods, and everyone began running in different directions. The Keth were known throughout the galaxy as slavers and killers. Raiders who attacked without mercy and took what they wanted without regard for treaties or laws or basic decency. Seo Yun stood in the center of the chaos, watching the crowd stream past. And somewhere in the distance, they heard the first explosions as the Keth began their assault on the station. They thought of the human who had caught the falling container, who had saved lives without hesitation and walked away without seeking thanks. They thought of the whispers and the warnings and the fear in everyone's voice when they spoke of Terrans, and they wondered, as the station shook around them and the screams began, whether the monsters of human myth might be exactly what Nexus Station needed right now. Dawn came to Nexus Station in the form of emergency. Lights finally stabilizing, and the distant sound of Keth ships detaching. From the docking ports in full retreat, Captain Jiang stood at a viewport watching the enemy flee, her face expressionless, but her shoulders finally relaxing from the tension they had carried through the long night. Seo Yun stood nearby, exhausted beyond anything they had ever experienced, but unable to rest until they had seen this through to the end. "They are leaving," Ji-hoon said, joining them at the viewport. All of them, even the ships that were not damaged. "Fear spreads faster than fire," the captain replied. "Every survivor who escaped our attacks carried stories back to their commanders. And those stories grew with each telling. She turned away from the viewport, and her eyes met Seo Yun's. "You stayed," she said. And there was something like respect in her voice. Most would have hidden in the first shelter they could find. "I needed to understand," Seo Yun replied, "and I think I finally do." The station came back to life around them as survivors emerged. From hiding and rescue teams began their work medical. Personnel rushed through the corridors treating the wounded while security forces swept the remaining sectors for any Keth who had not escaped. The 7 humans moved through this chaos, offering help wherever they could. Their weapons put away and their manner completely changed from the terrifying hunters of the night. Seo Yun watched Hyong Suk lift debris off a trapped civilian with the same hands that had broken Kethbone's hours. Before they watched Yuna bandage wounds with gentle care while humming the same children's song she had sung during combat. They watched Ji-hoon comfort a grieving family who had lost someone in the attack, holding their hands and speaking quietly in words the translator could not catch. These were the same monsters who had hunted raiders through dark corridors. These were the Bay creatures who had made an army of slavers flee in terror, and yet here they were, tender and compassionate and utterly human in a way. Seo Yun had never expected. Captain Jang found a quiet corner to sit and rest, and Sezeon joined her without asking permission. The two of them watched the station slowly return to normal in silence for a long time. "What happens now?" Seo Yun asked finally. "We repair our ships and resupply," the captain replied. "Then we move on to wherever we are needed next. There is always someone somewhere who needs help. That is your life," Seo Yun said. "Traveling from crisis to crisis, fighting battles that are not yours." The captain shrugged, a gesture that seemed to carry the weight of years. "Someone has to," she said. "And humans are good at it, whether we like it or not." A medical team approached Captain Jang, insisting on treating the wounds she had been ignoring since the battle in the marketplace. Seo Yun stepped away to give them space and found themselves face to face with a dying Keth warrior being carried on a stretcher. The raider was young, Ao Yun realized, perhaps not much older than themselves by their species standards. Their eyes met, and the Keth's face twisted with something between fear and confusion. "You were with them," the raider whispered. "With the demons in the dark." Seo Yun did not know what to say, so they simply nodded. "We thought the stories were legends," the Keth continued, their voice growing weaker, "meant to frighten children. We thought if we brought enough warriors we could overwhelm them with numbers." They coughed and blood appeared on their lips. "We were wrong," they finished. "The myths were true, all of them?" "Yes," Seo Yun agreed quietly. "They were." The Keth closed their eyes and did not open them again. Ao Yun stood over the body and felt something unexpected. Not hatred for an enemy, but sadness for a young creature who had been taught the wrong lessons about the universe. A few hours later, the captain found Seo Yun at the same viewport where they had first spoken. "Watching ships come and go as normal commerce began to resume. My crew and I are leaving soon," she said. "But I wanted to thank you for your courage last night." "I did nothing," Seo Yun replied. "I only watched." "You witnessed," the captain corrected. "And you will carry what you saw to others. That has value beyond what you might think." She held out her hand, and after a moment, Seo Yun understood the gesture and took it. "Fair travels," the captain said. "And try not to believe everything you hear about my species." She walked away before Seo Yun could respond, joining her crew near the docking port where their ship waited. The young merchant watched them go. 7 warriors who had saved thousands of lives and asked for nothing in return. The journey home took several days, and Seo Yun spent most of it preparing for the questions they knew would come when they finally arrived at their trading guild's headquarters. Old Taehan was waiting at the dock with worry clear on their aged features. "You were on Nexus Station during the attack," the elder said immediately. "We heard the reports. Are you injured?" "I am unharmed," Seo-Yun replied. "But I have a story to tell that will change how you think about many things." That evening, Seo-Yun gathered the entire trading guild in their great hall and told them everything. They spoke of whispered warnings and marketplace myths, of a container falling and a stranger catching it like it weighed nothing at all. They described the battle in the marketplace and the hunt through dark corridors and the terror that 7 humans had spread through an army of hundreds. But mostly they spoke of kindness, of water given to dying enemies and children carried to safety, and mercy shown where none was deserved. When they finished, the hall was silent for a long moment. "So the stories are true," Taehan said finally. "Humans are monsters." "Yes," Seo-Yun agreed, "but not the kind of monsters we were taught to fear." They stood up and looked around at their people, their merchant family who had always been taught to avoid humans at all costs. "The galaxy warns us to stay away from Terrans because they are dangerous," Seo-Yun continued, "and that is true. They are the most dangerous beings I have ever encountered." They paused and let the weight of those words settle. "But they are only dangerous to those who prey upon the innocent," they said, "to slavers and raiders and those who would harm children, to the helpless and the frightened and those who need protection. Humans are the greatest friends you can ever find." Seo-Yun's words spread from that guild hall to other traders, and from those traders to other species, and slowly a new story began to circulate through the galaxy. It was still a story about human monsters, about creatures who could not be killed and would not be stopped and would hunt you across stars if you gave them reason. But it was also a story about protectors, about beings who chose to use their terrible gifts in service of those who could not defend themselves. The galaxy had spoken of human monsters for generations, and those myths would never die. But now there were new myths growing alongside them. Stories about 7 warriors on a space station who had turned the hunters into prey. Stories about monsters who were also heroes. Stories that made the vulnerable feel less afraid and the predators look over their shoulders. Seo-Yun returned to their trading routes and their normal life. But they were never quite the same, because they had seen the truth behind the whispers, the reality behind the myths. And they knew something that few in the galaxy understood. The human monsters were real. They were exactly as terrible as the legends claimed, and if you were innocent, that was the best news you could ever receive, because somewhere out there, watching the stars, were creatures who would never stop hunting those who hurt the helpless. The galaxy spoke of human monsters, and the myths did not lie. They just never told the whole truth. The corridors of Nexus Station had become a nightmare. Landscape of flickering lights and distant screams, and the ever-present smell of smoke drifting from damaged systems. Seo-Yun followed Captain Jang's group through the darkness, staying close as ordered, watching everything with eyes that seemed unable to blink. The humans moved differently now than they had in the marketplace battle, spreading out in a loose formation that covered all angles while remaining close enough to support each other in an instant. They did not speak with words, but instead used hand signals and subtle gestures that communicated volumes of information in complete silence. At an intersection where 4 corridors met, the captain raised one fist and everyone stopped immediately. Seo-Yun pressed against the wall and tried to make themselves as small as possible while the humans listened to something the young merchant could not hear. "Patrol ahead," Ji-Hoon whispered, his lips barely moving. 12, maybe 15, heading toward the residential sector. The captain nodded and pointed at 3 of her crew, making a circling motion with her finger. The 3 humans peeled off and disappeared into a side corridor without making a sound. "What are they doing?" Seo-Yun whispered. "Flanking," the captain replied. We hit them from 3 sides at once. No survivors get away to warn the others. The casual way she said no survivors made So Yu-hyun's stomach turn. But they did not look away when the attack began. The humans struck from the shadows like vengeful spirits, appearing behind and beside and in front of the Keth patrol in the same instant. It was over before most of the raiders even knew they were under attack. A brutal, efficient slaughter that left 15 bodies on the floor in less than a minute. The captain did not stop to celebrate or rest, simply gesturing for her team to keep moving. That was the first of many, she said to Seo Yun as they stepped over the fallen Keth. Before this night is over, they will learn to fear the dark. The hours that followed reshaped Seo Yun's understanding of what humans were capable of in ways they could never have imagined. The 7 Terrans moved through Nexus Station like ghosts made of violence, appearing and disappearing without warning, striking Keth patrols and supply lines and communication relays with surgical precision. They never attacked the same way twice, sometimes rushing in with overwhelming force and sometimes picking off stragglers, one by one, until the survivors broke and ran and they talked to each other the entire time, calling out positions and threats and jokes in their strange language, laughing in the middle of combat as if this were all some kind of game. Seo-yun watched a human named Yuna take down 3 Keth warriors with her bare hands while singing, something that the translator identified as a children's rhyme about a farmer. They watched the massive woman called Hyung-suk use a broken piece of equipment as a club, knocking raiders unconscious instead of killing them for reasons as Yo-yoon could not understand. They watched Yoo-hoon dodge between enemy fire like he was dancing, his movements fluid and graceful and utterly impossible for any species the young merchant had ever encountered. But it was what happened between the fights that truly opened Seo-yun's eyes. In a residential corridor, they found a group of civilian survivors hiding in an apartment, mostly elderly aliens too frail to run, and the captain posted one of her crew to guard them while leaving behind water and medical supplies in a maintenance shaft. They discovered a nomad child who had become separated from their family, crying silently in the darkness, and Ji-hoon carried the small creature for the next hour until they could reunite them with other survivors in a damaged section of the station. They came across a Keth warrior who had been crushed under fallen debris, clearly dying and clearly terrified, and the captain stopped to offer them water and hold their claw until the end came. Why? Seo-yun asked when they moved on, unable to contain the question any longer. Why show kindness to an enemy who would have enslaved children? The captain was quiet for a long moment before answering. Because cruelty is easy, she said, and we have enough monsters in the universe already. As they pushed deeper into Keth-controlled territory, Al-Yuan began to notice something changing in the enemy. The first patrols they had encountered were confident and aggressive, hunters who believed they owned the station and everyone in it. But the patrols they found now were different, nervous and jumpy and quick to retreat at the slightest sound. The humans had spread fear through the Keth ranks like a disease, and the infection was growing with every attack. In a large cargo bay, the group stumbled upon a gathering of Keth warriors, at least 50 of them preparing for an assault on the civilian shelters. The captain raised her fist and the team stopped, observing from the shadows. Too many to take head on, Yuna whispered. Even for us. The captain smiled that cold smile again. Then we do not take them head on, she replied. We take them apart piece by piece. What followed was not a battle but a hunt. Exactly as the captain had promised, the humans split up and circled the cargo bay, each one finding a position in the shadows where they could strike and disappear. Then they began. Keth on the outer edge of the group simply vanished, pulled into darkness without a sound. Another fell to a throne blade that came from nowhere and everywhere. At once, a third started screaming about demons before something silenced them forever. The remaining raiders clustered together, weapons pointing outward at shadows that seemed to move on their own. And Seo Yun watched as hardened warriors began to shake with fear. "What are they?" one of the Keth shouted, voice cracking. "Where are they?" a voice answered from the darkness. Captain Zhang's voice amplified somehow to echo from every direction. "We are everywhere," she said. "And we are not finished with you." 3 more Keth fell in the time it took to blink. The remaining raiders broke and ran, abandoning their weapons and their mission and their pride in a desperate scramble for safety. The humans let them go. "Why not finish them?" Seo Yun asked when the captain emerged from the shadows, confused by this apparent mercy. "Because they will spread the fear," the captain explained. "They will tell the others what happened here. And every Keth on this station will start looking over their shoulder, wondering if they are next." She wiped blood from her hands with a piece of cloth, and her eyes held satisfaction without joy. "Fear is a weapon," she continued, "and we have just armed every survivor on this station with it." The group moved on, continuing their methodical campaign of terror against the terrors who had come to enslave the innocent. Seo Yun followed in silence, watching and learning and slowly understanding. The galaxy had whispered about human monsters for generations, warning every species to stay away from these creatures who could not be killed and would not be stopped. But the whispers had missed the most important truth. Humans were not monsters by nature, but by choice. And they chose their prey with deliberate care. They hunted slavers and raiders and those who preyed upon the helpless. They protected children and comforted the dying, and showed mercy even to enemies who deserved none. They were exactly what the myths described: persistent and dangerous and utterly without fear. But those myths had been written by the wrong audience. The monsters were real. Seo Yun realized as they watched Ji-hoon help an injured civilian to safety. But they had never been hunting the innocent. They were hunting the hunters. And the galaxy should have been telling very different stories all along. The humans moved the survivors to a more defensible section of the station, a storage area with only 2 entrances and walls, thick enough to stop most weapons, Captain. Zhang posted guards at both doors while the rest of her crew worked to make the frightened civilians as comfortable as possible in such terrible circumstances. Seo Yun sat in a corner watching everything, with eyes that could not quite believe what they had witnessed. Feathers still ruffled and hearts still racing from the violence they had seen. The human with mixed features, the one who had asked if Cyan was injured, approached again with a container of water and some emergency rations. "You should eat," he said, offering the supplies. "Your species has a fast metabolism, yes. You need fuel, especially when stressed." Seo Yun took the offerings with shaking wing fingers and finally found their voice. "How did you know about my metabolism?" they asked the human. Shrugged and sat down nearby without invitation. "I read about Valorians when I was younger," he replied. "I found your species fascinating. The feathers and the flight and the training culture, all very interesting." This casual admission of curiosity struck Seo Yun as somehow more surprising than anything else that had happened today. "You study other species for enjoyment?" they asked. "Many humans do," the young man said. "We are curious creatures. We want to understand everything, even things that frighten us." Seo Yun nibbled at the rations while considering this information, and slowly the fear in their chest began to make room for something else. "I am called Seo Yun," they said finally. The human smiled, and his whole face transformed from something guarded to something genuinely warm. "I am Park Ki-hoon," he replied. "It is nice to meet you despite the circumstances." Captain Zhang appeared before Seo Yun could respond. her expression serious but not unkind. Ji-hoon stopped flirting with the bird person and helped Yong-soo with the perimeter check. She ordered the young human blushed in a way that fascinated So-yeon for reasons they did not fully understand, and hurried off to follow the command. The captain took his place, sitting down with a heaviness that suggested exhaustion. She was trying very hard to hide. "You are the one who stood frozen in the marketplace when the shooting started," she said. "And it was not a question. I saw you watching this fight." So-yeon nodded, embarrassed by their own failure to act. "I wanted to help, but I could not move," they admitted. "My body would not obey me. That is normal," the captain said without judgment. "Most species freeze when faced with violence. It is a survival instinct. The ones who run or fight without training usually die first." This matter-of-fact observation made So-yeon feel slightly less ashamed. "The stories about your kind," the young merchant began hesitantly. "The whispers I heard all through the station. Are they true?" Captain Jang was quiet for a long moment, her scarred face unreadable. "Which stories?" she asked finally. "All of them," So-yeon replied. "The persistence and the pain tolerance and the pack bonds and the refusal to die. All of it." The captain reached up and touched one of the scars on her face, tracing its path from her eye to her jaw. "We evolved on a world that tried very hard to kill us," she said. "Everything on Earth was either predator or prey, and sometimes both at the same time. So we became something that could survive anything." She paused and looked at So-yeon with eyes that had seen too much. "We can run for days without stopping. We can survive wounds that would kill most species 3 times over. Our bodies produce chemicals that suppress pain and fear when we need to fight. And yes, we form bonds so strong that we will die for creatures we have just met." So-yeon felt their feathers rising again as the reality of human nature became clear. "You are exactly what the myths describe," they said quietly. "We are," the captain agreed. "But there is something the myths do not mention." She leaned closer, and her voice dropped to something almost like a confession. "We tell stories about our own monsters," she said. "Creatures who look like us but who kill for pleasure, who hurt the weak because they enjoy it, who feel nothing for the suffering of others." This admission confused So-yeon more than anything else. "Your species has monsters among you?" they asked. "Every species does," the captain replied. "But humans are perhaps unique in how much we fear our own capacity for evil. We know what we can become when we stop caring about others." She stood up and looked down at So-yeon with something that might have been respect. "That is why some of us choose to protect strangers," she continued. "Because we know the alternative is becoming the very thing we fear most." "Why are you here?" So-yeon asked, the question escaping before they could stop it. "Why risk your lives for species you have never met?" Captain Jang smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. "Because we can," she said simply. "Because no one else was going to. And because those children deserve to grow up without knowing what it feels like to be a slave." She walked away before So-yeon could respond, moving to check on her crew and the civilian survivors scattered throughout the storage area. The young merchants sat alone with their thoughts, trying to fit this new understanding of humans into the framework of myths and warnings they had been given. The galaxy spoke of human monsters with fear and horror, but no one had explained that the monsters had chosen their prey. Deliberately, the humans were terrifying because they had the capacity to be the most dangerous beings in known space, but they were also something else entirely, something the myths had failed to capture in their whispered warnings. They were protectors. The captain's communication device crackled with incoming messages, and her expression hardened as she listened to reports from elsewhere in the station. "The Keth are consolidating their forces," she announced to her crew. "They mean to sweep through the civilian sectors and take everyone they can find." The other humans gathered around her, 6 warriors waiting for orders with expressions that range from determined to eager. Station security is regrouping, but they will not be ready in time. The captain continued. If we wait here, the Keth will overwhelm us with numbers and take everyone in this room. The young human Ji-hoon spoke up with a question that made Seo Yun's blood run cold. So we go to them instead? He asked. Captain Jang nodded slowly, and a smile spread across her scarred face that contained no warmth at all. We hunt, she said, and the word carried centuries of human history behind it. We find them before they find us. We hit them hard enough to break their confidence, and we make them too afraid to continue. One of the other humans, a massive woman with arms like tree trunks, laughed out loud. 7 against a fleet, she said. I like those odds. The humans began preparing their weapons and checking their equipment, moving with the efficiency of a team that had done this 1,000 times before Seo Yun stood up on trembling legs and approached the captain before they could talk themselves out of it. I want to come with you, they said, and their own voice surprised them with its steadiness. Captain. Jang turned and studied the young Valorian with eyes that seemed to look straight through to their soul. You froze in the marketplace, she said bluntly. You have never fought in your life, and you will be a liability in combat. I know, Seo Yun admitted, but I cannot hide here while you risk everything for strangers. I need to see this. I need to understand. The captain was quiet for a long moment, and then she nodded once. Stay behind us, she ordered. Do exactly what I tell you and nothing else. And if I say run, you run without looking back. Seo Yun agreed with a bob of their head. Too nervous to speak, the humans moved toward the door. 7 monsters preparing to hunt the hunters, and Seo Yun followed them into the darkness of the station. They did not know what they would find out there in the corridors filled with death and danger, but they knew they had to see it for themselves. They had to understand what the galaxy had been whispering about all these years. The Keth came like a wave of scales and teeth, pouring through breaches in the stations, outer hull with weapons blazing, and voices raised in their terrible war chants. Seo Yun had found shelter in the central marketplace, along with dozens of other civilians, hiding behind overturned stalls and abandoned cargo containers while the sound of battle echoed through the corridors. Station security had responded quickly, but the Keth had brought overwhelming numbers, and within minutes the defenders were falling back on every front. A Kasari. Security officers stumbled into the marketplace with blood running from wounds on their face and arms, shouting for everyone to stay down and stay quiet. They are coming this way, the officer gasped. There are too many of them, and we cannot hold the line. Panic spread through the huddled civilians like fire through dry grass, and Seo Yun watched as some tried to run only to be called back by others who knew there was nowhere safe to go. Among the frightened crowd were children of several species, small ones who cried for parents they could not find, and Seo Yun felt their heart break at the sound of their fear. The Keth did not ransom prisoners or show mercy to the weak, and everyone in that marketplace knew what capture would mean. The first raiders appeared at the eastern entrance, tall reptilian warriors covered in natural armor and carrying weapons, designed to wound rather than kill because living slaves were worth more than dead bodies. Their leader stepped forward and surveyed the cowering civilians with cold satisfaction. In their yellow eyes, separate the young ones, the Keth commander ordered. They will bring the highest prices at the markets. Seo Yun wanted to stand and fight, wanted to do something other than tremble like prey waiting for the predator's jaws. But their body refused to obey, and their courage had abandoned them completely. Then a new sound cut through the chaos. Footsteps approaching from the western corridor. Calm and measured and completely unhurried, 7 figures emerged from the shadows, moving in perfect formation, like dancers performing a routine they had practiced 1,000 times before. They were humans. Seo-Yun realized with a shock that ran through their entire body. 7 of the monsters from the myths walking straight toward 100 armed Keth warriors. The leader was a woman with dark hair streaked with gray and scars that crossed her face like a map of old battles. And she stopped between the civilians and the raiders as casually, as if she were stepping out for a morning walk. "You should leave," the human woman said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent marketplace. "Take your ships and go back to whatever hole you crawled out of." The Keth commander laughed. A harsh sound like rocks grinding together. "7 of you against all of us," the commander replied. "The famous Terran arrogance? It will be a pleasure to break you slowly." The human woman turned to look at the civilians behind her. And when her eyes met Seo-Yun's, there was something in them that made the young merchant's fear suddenly seem smaller and less important. "Stay behind us," she said simply. "We will not let them touch you." Then she turned back to face the Keth. And Seo-Yun watched as she reached up and removed her jacket to reveal arms, covered in muscle and more scars than seemed possible for a living creature to have survived. The other humans did the same. 6 warriors of various sizes and appearances, but all sharing the same calm confidence that bordered on something Seo-Yun could only call madness. The Keth commander raised one clawed hand and gave the order to attack. What happened next would haunt Seo-Yun's dreams for the rest of their life. The humans moved like nothing the young merchant had ever seen, flowing through the Keth lines with a speed and precision that defied belief. And everywhere they went, the raiders fell. A male, human with skin as dark as space, took a blade through his shoulder and simply grabbed the Keth who had stabbed him and threw the warrior into 3 of their companions hard enough to crack armor. A female human with red hair dodged between attacks that should have been impossible to avoid, her hands finding throats and joints and weak points in Keth armor with mechanical efficiency. The scarred woman who led them fought with a brutality that made Seo-Yun's stomach turn, using her enemy's weapons against them and showing no hesitation and no mercy. And through it, all the humans never stopped moving, never showed pain despite wounds that would have left any Valorian screaming on the ground, never lost their terrible focus for even a moment. The Keth had numbers and weapons and the advantage of surprise. But the humans had something else entirely. They had each other. Seo-Yun watched as they called out warnings and information to one another without looking, watched as they moved to protect each other's blind spots and created openings for their companions to exploit, watched as 7 individuals became one perfect killing machine. A Keth warrior broke through the line and charged toward the cowering civilians, blade raised to strike the nearest child. The scarred woman appeared from nowhere, intercepting the raider with a tackle that drove them both to the ground. And when she stood again, the Keth did not stay down. She called to the civilians, and her voice was not even breathing hard despite the carnage around her. "This will be over soon." It was over in minutes, though it felt like hours to Seo-Yun, who could not look away no matter how much they wanted to. The remaining Keth retreated through the eastern entrance, leaving their dead and wounded behind, and the silence that followed was broken only by the soft crying of frightened children. The scarred woman turned to face the civilians, and for a moment, Seo-Yun saw exhaustion cross her features before she forced it away. "I am Captain Jang Min-ji of the Terran vessel Persistent," she announced. "My crew will secure this area and ensure your safety until station security can re-establish control." One of the children, a small sylphie barely old enough to fly, drifted over to the captain and grabbed her blood-stained hand without fear. "Thank you for saving us," the child said in their singing voice. Something changed in the captain's face, something soft and almost gentle appearing beneath the hard exterior, and she knelt down to meet the child's eyes. "You are welcome," she said quietly. "No one will hurt you while we are here." Seo-yun watched this exchange with a confusion that threatened to overwhelm their understanding of the universe. These were the monsters, the creatures every species in the galaxy had warned them about. And yet here was one of them kneeling in the blood of her enemies to comfort a frightened child. The myth spoke of human violence and human persistence and human madness, but no one had ever mentioned that they might also be kind. The other humans spread out through the marketplace, checking the wounded and offering what medical assistance they could. And Seo-yun noticed that they treated aliens and Keth alike without discrimination. One of them approached Seo-yun directly. A young man with features that suggested mixed ancestry and eyes that held more warmth than seemed possible given what those eyes had just witnessed. "Are you injured?" he asked, his accent making the translator work harder than usual. Seo-yun shook their head, still unable to find words. "Good," the human said with a small smile. "Stay close to the group and we will keep you safe." He moved on before Seo-yun could respond. "Already looking for others who might need help." The station shook again as explosions echoed from distant sections, and Captain Jang's expression hardened as she listened to reports coming through her communication device. "The Keth are massing for a major push," she announced to her crew. "They mean to take the entire station." Seo-yun felt despair settle into their chest like a cold stone, because no matter how impressive these 7 humans were, they could not fight an entire army forever. But when they looked at Captain Jang, they saw no fear in her scarred face, only determination, and something that looked almost like anticipation. "Let them come," the captain said quietly, and her smile made Seo-yun understand for the first time why the galaxy whispered about humans in fear and wonder.